town had a terrifying stillness. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the silence of something long dead. A place where old stories wait to be retold. For me, Ethan, a night watchman at the old Westwick Public Library, that stillness was my only friend. I'd been working this job for 3 years. 3 years of just me and the books, in a space where time seemed to cease to exist. But tonight, something was different. The air was thick, heavy, and colder than usual, as if an invisible presence were compressing the entire space. Westwick Library isn't just a library. It's a monument. Built in the late 1800s, with its gray stone walls, soaring ceilings, and antiquated oak bookshelves, the place exuded an ancient, ghostly vibe. The townsfolk often told chilling stories about it. About the ghost of the first librarian, a woman named Alara Vance, who was said to have vanished mysteriously within the library's walls. They were just old wives' tales, but I always felt a strange curiosity, a haunting fascination with her story. At around 2 a.m., while checking the top floors, I discovered a small photo wedged behind an old book. The photo was faded, showing a young woman with deep, somber eyes. Her beauty was overshadowed by an unnamed sorrow, a desperation etched onto her face. It was Alara Vance. I knew it instantly. For a split second, I felt as if her gaze was directed straight at me. Not from the photo, but from somewhere far away. A place that didn't belong to this world. As I picked up the photo, a sudden wave of icy cold air rushed over me, making me shiver. There was no wind, no open window. Its light wasn't a reflection. It was like a flickering flame, a trapped soul trying to communicate with me. "She's calling to me," I muttered to myself. My voice was lost in the silence of the library. "Tonight, fear will find you." The voice resonated again, clearer this time, as if it was spoken right behind my back. I spun around, and in a brief moment, I saw a blurry shadow figure dart past, leaving only a cold draft and the musty scent of old paper and dust. I knew I was no longer safe. I had stepped into a place where I didn't belong, and I had awakened something that I shouldn't have awakened. The photo of Alara Vance wasn't an ordinary picture. It was a gateway, an invitation to another world. And I, foolishly, had accepted that invitation. This night wouldn't end with the usual quiet. It would end in horror. Because tonight, fear will find you. And terrifyingly, I felt a strange curiosity urging me to explore what awaited me in the darkness of Westwick Library. I knew that from this moment on, I was no longer just a night watchman, but a part of the horror story that people often tell. I would not run. I would face it. My hands trembled as I placed the photo back on the desk, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, A trick of the mind, fueled by the late hour and the eerie silence of the library. But the lingering scent of old paper and dust, now mixed with a faint floral perfume, told me otherwise. The air was heavy, and the silence had a new, palpable quality. The kind that makes you want to shout, just to hear a sound that isn't your own ragged breathing. I decided to walk the perimeter again, a routine I'd done 1,000 times, hoping the familiar motion would ground me. But the routine hashed sex at Meta, sex 0.05. The vibrations resonated through the floorboards, and I felt as though the whole library was groaning, a beast awakening from a long slumber. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging me into absolute blinding darkness. The whispers intensified, becoming clearer now, intertwining with the rattling of chains and the soft, steady rhythm of weeping. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with panic. The screen lit up, a small beacon in the oppressive blackness, but it was just enough to show me a brief, fleeting shadow. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the very end of the aisle. It was too fast for my eyes to focus on, but the sense of its presence was overpowering. It wasn't a living person. It moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, as if it were a puppet with its strings being pulled by an unseen force. It just stood there, and the air around it was so cold it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. A single book slid out from its shelf, landing on the floor with a loud slap. It was a dusty, leather-bound volume, one I didn't recognize. The words on its cover seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of my phone. The whispers of the unseen. I felt an irrational compulsion to pick it up, to open it, to know what secrets it held. It was as if something inside me, a deep, primal curiosity, was overriding my fear. Don't touch it. A voice, my own voice, screamed in my head. But my hand was already reaching for it, trembling, as if controlled by some external will. The figure at the end of the aisle began to move, its form shimmering like heat haze. It was no longer still. It glided towards me with unnerving speed. Its face, or what I could make out of it, was a blur of distorted features, a vortex of pain and anguish. And then I heard it. The words I had been fearing since I first saw the photo. You belong to us now. The whispers were no sex 0.05 heavier and more menacing than before. It was a silence filled with 1,000 unsaid things. My phone's light was a shaky, insufficient defense against the encroaching darkness. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, but something held me back, a morbid curiosity that felt dangerously like a pull from the other side. Tonight, fear will find you, the voice had promised, and it had. But now, it seemed to be inviting me to go deeper. My eyes fell on the spot where the figure had stood. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer hung in the air, like dust motes caught in a sunbeam. But there was no sun. It was just an afterimage of its presence. As I took a hesitant step forward, I noticed something on the floor, half hidden by the shadow of a bookshelf. It was a small, ornate key, its metal tarnished and green with age. It didn't belong to the library's modern key set. This was old, very old. The key was cold to the touch, and as my fingers closed around it, a new vision flashed in my mind. Not a ghost, but a brief, startling image of a young woman's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth a silent scream. It was Alara Vance, but not from the faded photograph. This was a living, breathing memory, a moment of pure, unfiltered terror. I dropped the key as if it were on fire. The key felt like a hook, pulling me into the history of this place. The logical part of my brain screamed to run, to leave the key in the library behind. But the primal, story-seeking part of me was now in control. I had to know what had happened to her. I picked up the key again. It was the color of a tarnished coin, and it felt like it had a story to tell. I held it tightly in my hand as I moved back towards the main reading room, my mind a storm of questions. I needed to find a place where this key belonged. A locked door, a hidden chest, anything. My flashlight beam danced across the spot. Sex 0.05, every single one of them. Not a single word. But as I held the key from the floor over the pages, a faint glowing script began to appear, shimmering with an ethereal light. It was a language I didn't recognize, but the emotions it conveyed were terrifyingly clear. Pain, grief, betrayal. It was her journal, but it was written in the language of the dead. I looked at the photograph of Alara Vance on my desk. Her eyes, once filled with a heartbreaking sorrow, now seemed to hold a desperate plea, urging me to understand, to read on. I traced the glowing letters on the page with my finger, and with each touch, more words appeared, revealing a terrifying truth. She wasn't just a missing person. She was a victim, and she had been betrayed by someone she trusted, someone who worked in this very library. The journal was her final testimony. The pages revealed a secret hidden in the library's labyrinthine depths, a secret so dark it had consumed her. I was no longer a curious observer. I was now a participant, a key to unlocking her story. A cold breeze swept through the room, though all the windows were shut. The book on my lap grew colder, and the words on the pages began to glow brighter, as if a life force had been injected into them. A chilling voice whispered from the depths of the library. You have found her secret, but the one who took it will not rest. My heart pounded. I was no longer just dealing with a sad ghost. I was dealing with a malevolent force, an entity that had a reason to want this story to remain untold. The entity was coming for me, because tonight, fear will find you. And it was clear that it was more than ready for a fight. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. But the fear was now #meta, pause, 0.05. I had to search the library's vast archives for anything related to her, to the year of her disappearance. I was no longer a bystander. I was a detective, thrust into a cold case that was anything but cold. I started with the Old Town records, dusty ledgers that chronicled the library's history. Flipping through the brittle, yellowed pages, I found entries about the building's construction, lists of staff members, and notes on community events. The records were meticulously kept, but there was a strange, unsettling gap. The entry for Alara Vance's employment ended abruptly. There was no mention of her leaving, no resignation, no termination. Just a clean, sudden break in the record, as if she had simply ceased to exist. I ran my finger over the blank space, and a faint chill prickled my skin. I knew that she hadn't simply left. Something had happened here, something dark and sinister that someone had tried to erase. Tonight, fear will find you. The voice in my head whispered, a cruel reminder that I was digging in a grave best left undisturbed. I moved on to the old periodicals, stacks of newspapers from the late 1800s. The news was filled with mundane stories, town meetings, crop reports, social gossip. It took hours of painstaking searching, my eyes straining in the dim light, before I finally found it. A small, buried article on page 7 titled, "Librarian's Disappearance Baffles Authorities." It was a brief, dismissive piece. It stated that Alara Vance had not shown up for her shift, and her living quarters above the library were found empty. The police had no leads, and the case was closed as a simple runaway. My blood ran cold. The tone was so nonchalant, so quick to dismiss her. It felt wrong. It felt like a cover-up. The article was a lie. A fabricated story meant to bury the truth forever. I slammed the paper shut, the sound echoing through the cavernous space.
Shit, meta. Sex, 0.05. The lock sprang open.
I lifted the lid, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound diary. It was the original, not a spectral copy. The pages were filled with a spidery, elegant handwriting, and as my eyes scanned the first few lines, I felt a wave of profound sorrow wash over me. It was Alara's handwriting, her final words. A confession of her darkest secrets and the terrifying truth about the library. It was all there, written in a language I could finally understand. A tale of love, betrayal, and a sinister ritual that had turned her into the vengeful spirit haunting this place. Tonight, fear will find you. The words no longer felt like a threat. They felt like a promise, a confession from a tormented soul. I had found the secret. I had found the ghost. And now, I was a part of her story. There was no turning back. My hands trembled as I carefully opened the diary, the scent of old paper and dried blood filling the air. Alara Vance's elegant handwriting covered the pages, but the words were a torrent of despair. She wrote of her love for a fellow librarian, a man named Arthur Thorne, and their quiet, shared world among the books. But her happiness was short-lived. She began to notice strange occurrences, books moving on their own, the chilling laughter of a child echoing from empty hallways, and a growing sense of dread that permeated the very stones of the library. She wrote about a specific ritual, an ancient, forbidden text that Arthur had become obsessed with. He believed it held the key to immortality, but Alara soon realized it was a gateway to something else, something monstrous. The ritual required a sacrifice, a soul bound to the library's foundation, forever fueling the demonic entity it would summon. As I read her words, a horrifying truth began to dawn on me. Arthur Thorne, blinded by his ambition, had intended to sacrifice her. He had lured her to a secret part of the sex meta. But from the pages of the diary, it was a part of the curse, a part of her torment. The pages began to glow with a faint, ethereal light, and the images flashed again, more vivid this time. I saw Arthur, his face contorted in a grimace of unholy ecstasy as he performed the ritual.
the library's very stones groaning in protest. I saw Ilara's terrified face, her silent scream as the ethereal chains of the curse wrapped around her, binding her to the physical world, to this place. I was looking not just at a story, but at a memory, a moment of pure, raw horror that was now a part of me. The diary went on to describe the nature of the curse. It was a parasitic entity, a being of pure malevolence that fed on fear and sorrow. It was the source of all the strange events, the whispers, the cold spots, the phantom figures. It used Ilara's trapped soul as its eyes and ears, its lure, a beautiful, tragic facade to draw in its prey. The entity was not bound by the ritual itself. It was merely attracted to the spiritual energy it created, like a predator to a scent. And Arthur? He was gone, consumed by the very power he had sought. He had become a part of the entity, a monstrous shadow of his former self. I felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of disorientation. I wasn't just in a haunted library. I was in a ghost story. And I was the next chapter. The book on my lap wasn't just an old diary. It was a testament, a final warning from a woman whose final moments were spent watching her own spirit be trapped. My initial curiosity was now a suffocating terror. The ghost I had sought was not a friendly spirit needing help. It was a tormented soul, forced into a role it didn't want. And the real enemy was a timeless entity that had been waiting for its next meal. I looked at the worn pages, the spidery script a map of my own impending doom. The key I had found wasn't just #@meta, sex 0.05. The rational part of my brain, though small and weak, screamed at me to run, to leave the diary, the key, and this haunted place behind forever. But the moment I turned towards the exit, a voice, a hollow, whispery voice, spoke my name. It was not Ilara's, nor was it the voice of the malevolent entity. It was my own name, spoken with a mournful, drawn-out reverence, as if from the very walls themselves. I froze. I spun around, my phone's light dancing across the bookshelves. But there was nothing. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and it had been directed at me. A wave of ice-cold air washed over me, a spectral breeze that smelled of wet earth and decay. I could feel a new presence in the library, a heavier, more deliberate one. It was no longer lurking in the shadows. It was making itself known. And it was angry. The books on the shelves began to vibrate, a low, ominous hum that grew into a rattling shudder. One by one, they slid out from their spots, landing on the floor with a rhythmic, pounding thud. It was a silent, terrifying assault, a display of power meant to terrify. Then came the sound from the top floor. It was the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking across the old wooden floorboards of the Aries, where the historical archives were kept. Thump, thump, thump. Each step was punctuated by a deafening silence that followed, as if the very air was holding its breath. The footsteps were too heavy to be Ilara's spirit. They were powerful, malevolent, and filled with a sinister purpose. They were coming for me. I held my breath, listening, my body rigid with terror. I imagined the thing that was making those sounds, a hulking, grotesque figure, its limbs long and gangly, its eyes two pools of utter blackness. The footsteps moved closer to the staircase, and I knew I had only seconds,
I needed to find a place to hide. Meta, a terrifying thunder of sound that was now directly above me. A horrifying pursuit. I reached the office door, my hand fumbling for the knob, my mind screaming with panic. The door was unlocked. I threw it open, leaped inside, and spun around, my hand reaching for the lock. But it was too late. As I tried to shut the door, a powerful, unseen force slammed it shut from the outside. The sound was deafening, a final metallic thud that resonated through my bones. The lock clicked, and I heard the key turn from the other side. A key that had not been there. I was trapped. I had made it to the one place that I thought was safe, only to find it was a cage. I pressed my back against the door, my heart a terrified bird in a cage, and looked around the small, dark room. The heavy curtains were drawn, and the only light came from the sliver of a crescent moon peeking through a crack in the blinds. I was alone, but I wasn't. The whispers began again, and this time, they weren't in my ears. They were in my head. A chorus of malevolent voices that promised a swift and painful end. The door slammed shut with a bone-jarring finality. The click of the lock, a death knell in the sudden, suffocating silence. I was trapped. Panic, raw and absolute, seized me, a living thing clawing at my throat. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in a strangled sob, until my back hit the cold, hard wood of a bookshelf. My phone, a useless beacon, slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor, its light winking out. I was plunged into a darkness so complete, it felt like a physical entity, a sentient void that wanted to consume me. The whispers began again. Sex 0.05. The sensation so real that I flinched, a scream catching in my throat. Tonight, fear will find you, the voice in my head whispered, and I realized with a gut-wrenching finality that the promise had been fulfilled. The air grew so thick with dread I could taste it, a metallic tang of rust and despair. The furniture in the room began to shift, to groan. The old leather chair in the corner rocked gently on its own, its squeaking a mocking lullaby. A stack of old files on the desk slid forward, scattering across the floor. They were not being pushed, they were being thrown, a burst of supernatural anger. I pressed myself harder against the bookshelf, my mind screaming. This wasn't a haunting. It was a siege. And I was the one being cornered. I tried to fight back the hysteria, to think, to reason, but my mind was a chaotic mess of adrenaline and terror. The walls of the office, once a symbol of safety, now felt like a coffin. There was no way out. The door was locked, and the windows were old, their panes thick and reinforced with wire. Even if I could break the glass, it was a long drop to the alley below. I was trapped, a rat in a maze, and the unseen force that had cornered me was now closing in for the kill. I could feel its breath on my neck, a breath that smelled of rot and grave dust. I sank to my knees, my body giving out under the weight of my terror.
The whispers became louder, clearer, and I could finally make out the words. They were not words of comfort or despair. They were words of hatred, of ancient, simmering rage. They hated the living. They hated this library. And most of all, they hated me. They were a legion of the forgotten, the wronged, and the murdered, all bound to this place by a terrible ritual. I was not just facing a ghost. I was facing an entire army of the dead.
Hashtag meta sex 0.05. A crushing presence that was slowly suffocating me. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a deafening silence that was somehow more terrifying. My mind, a frantic mess of terror and despair, felt like it was shutting down. I was defeated. I had no fight left. This was it. I was going to be another name on a missing person report, a ghost story to be told in hushed tones, another victim for a malevolent entity. The horror had won. But then, through the veil of my paralyzing fear, a new feeling broke through. It was not one of rage or of malice. It was pure, unadulterated sorrow. A feeling so profound and so overwhelming that it cut through the terror and settled deep in my soul. It was a wave of grief that didn't belong to me. It belonged to her, Ilara Vance. Her soul, bound to this library, was not malevolent. It was broken. She was not trying to hurt me. She was trying to warn me, to reach out, to find a way to break free. She was a prisoner, just like I was now, and she was being forced to witness my own demise. As I lay there, helpless, I heard a new sound. Not a whisper, but a faint, mournful sigh that seemed to come from the very air around me. A single, luminous tear dropped from the darkness above, landing on my cheek with an icy coldness that jolted me. It was not a physical tear. It was a droplet of pure grief. And as it touched my skin, a new image flashed in my mind. Not a memory of the past, but a vision of her, Ilara Vance. She stood before me, not as a blurry shadow or a terrifying apparition, but as a clear, ethereal figure. Her face, a mask of sorrow. Her eyes, meta pause, sex 0.05, the mournful cries. They weren't just a part of a haunting, they were the suffering of the dead, trapped within the entity's shadow. The terrifying noises were their endless, tormented screams, their futile attempts to break free. Ilara wasn't telling me to fight the entity. She was telling me to save the souls it had consumed. Her form began to flicker, to fade. The entity in the corner was pulling her back, its dark tendrils reaching out to reclaim its prisoner. A single tear, more luminous and heartbreaking than the last, fell from her eye. She was being consumed by the very thing she was begging me to defeat.
With a final, desperate burst of energy, her voice echoed in my mind. The key is not for the box. It is for the heart. You must find it. The heart of the curse. And then, with a silent scream, she was gone. Her luminous form sucked into the swirling vortex of darkness, leaving me alone once more. I was still pinned to the floor, but my despair had been replaced with a new feeling. Not hope, not courage, but purpose. I wasn't fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for her, for them, for all the souls trapped here. The entity in the corner pulsed with a renewed, sinister energy. It was a silent, malevolent thing, and it was waiting for me to break. But I would not break. I was not just a victim. I was a part of her story now, and I would not let her sacrifice be in vain. The crushing weight on my back lifted, a silent challenge from the entity. It was toying with me, letting me stand, letting me fight back. It was a hunter, and I was its prey. But I had a secret now, a purpose, a mission. I was going to save them. The crushing weight on my back lifted, but the cold lingered, a ghost of its presence. I remember they were a cry for help. I was not meant to fight the ghost, I was meant to save it. Alara's voice echoed in my mind, her final, desperate plea. You must not let it win. It feeds on your terror. You must show it mercy. You must save them. I understood now. The key she had pointed to was not a physical key, but a key to a different kind of truth. A key to her heart, to her story. She had found a way to resist, a way to use her torment to warn me, to guide me. She was a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. The entity had thought she was its prisoner, its tool, but she had fought back. She had used her captivity to find a way out, and I was her only hope. I looked around the small dark room, my phone's light still dark on the floor. I didn't need it. My eyes had adjusted to the gloom, and the room was no longer just a cage. It was a map. Every object, every piece of furniture, every book felt like a part of her story. The books on the shelves seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light, their words a silent testament to the secrets they held. The library was alive, not with evil, but with a tragic, painful history. My mission was no longer to escape. My mission was to set them free. To free Alara and all the other souls who had been consumed by the malevolent entity. I knelt down and picked up my phone. The screen remained dark. The battery was dead. The entity was not going to let me use any modern convenience to escape. It wanted to play by its own rules, on its own terms. It wanted a game of cat and mouse, a prolonged torment. But I would not play its game. I had a new game to play, one it had not anticipated. I was going to find a way to sever the connection between the entity and the souls it had consumed, and I was going to send them all home. I looked at the old dusty desk, its surface covered in a thin film of grime. I ran my hand over
Sex 0.05. Fear will find you.
The voice of the entity whispered from the dark corners of the room, but the words had lost their power. It was no longer a threat. It was a challenge, and I, for the first time in my life, felt ready to accept it. My terror had been replaced by a fierce, protective resolve, and the cold of the room no longer felt like a grave, but a challenge. I had a mission: to save a soul I had only just met. I looked at the dark, pulsating vortex of the entity, its malevolence a palpable weight in the air, and I knew I couldn't fight it with my fists. I had to outwit it. Ilara's final message echoed in my mind. The key is not for the box. It is for the heart. You must find it. The heart of the curse. I had found the key, the physical one that opened the box. But the true key, the one to the heart of the curse, was a lost item, a thing, an object that had a name and a story. The small, ghostly child I had seen was gone, but its gesture remained etched in my mind. It had pointed to the wall behind the desk, to the carved word, sanctuary. I ran my hand over the wooden paneling, searching for a seam, a weakness, anything that would tell me where to go next. The wood was solid, ancient, and unyielding. The carving was the only clue. I looked back at the diary on my desk, its pages still glowing with a faint, ethereal light. I turned to the last page Ilara had written. The words were a frantic scrawl, a race against time, a final, desperate plea. She wrote about Arthur, his growing obsession, and his discovery of the ritual's true purpose. The ritual wasn't meant to bind a soul forever, but to create a temporary bridge, a gateway for the parasitic entity. The entity needed an anchor, an object imbued with love and sorrow, a thing that could hold a soul in place. The item hashtag meta pause sex 0.05. It was there that I had met her. It was there that I had been given the mission. The answer was right in front of me.
The heart of the curse was not some ancient artifact or mythical object. It was a simple item, a thing that had a personal, emotional significance to Ilara. I went back to the main reading room, my feet moving with a new, determined purpose. The shadows seemed to part from me, and the whispers, once filled with hate, now seemed to murmur a kind of morbid encouragement. I needed to find a clue to the lost item, something that Arthur had left behind, a final, sadistic taunt. I remembered the town records, the missing page in her employment record. What was on that page? What was the last item of knowledge she had touched? My mind replayed the scene of me finding the photograph, her face filled with sorrow. And I remembered the small, ornate hairpin that had been nestled in her hair in the picture. It was a beautiful, simple thing, and it was missing from the photograph I held. It was the lost item. It had to be. It was the last thing Arthur had given her, a token of his false love, a beautiful lie that had become her prison. It was the anchor for her soul, and I knew where to find it. The library's most dangerous place wasn't the basement or some cursed attic. It was the one place where knowledge was forbidden. The restricted archives. The place where Arthur Thorne had conducted his dark ritual. The place that was locked and guarded, not by a physical lock,
but by the curses of the dead. I could feel the malevolent presence of the entity watching me now, its tendrils of darkness reaching out, probing my mind, trying to pull me back into the terror. Tonight, fear will find you, it hissed, its voice a chorus of 1,000 tormented souls. But the words had no power. I was no longer afraid. I was a man on a mission.
From the shadows beneath the stairs, a spectral figure emerged, a tall, menacing specter, its form a swirling vortex of blackness, its eyes 2 pinpricks of malevolent light. It was the ghost of Arthur Thorne, the man who had created this nightmare. He raised a translucent hand, and a wave of pure, concentrated dread washed over me, a physical force that tried to push me back, to send me tumbling down the stairs. I planted my feet, my muscles straining against the unseen force, and with a grunt of defiance, I pushed forward, up the steps. The ghost shrieked, a sound that was not a voice but the grinding of stone against stone. The stairs beneath me began to shift and crumble, the wood turning into dust, leaving gaping holes where solid steps had been. I had to move fast, to leap from one crumbling step to the next, the abyss of darkness below waiting to swallow me. I could feel the ghostly hands of Arthur Thorne reaching for my ankles, trying to drag me down. But I was not just running for my life anymore. I was running for a soul, for Alara, for all of them. The thought gave me strength, and with a final, desperate leap, I cleared the last crumbling step and landed on the solid landing above, leaving the shrieking ghost of Arthur Thorne behind me. I was on the 2nd floor now, and the horrors escalated. The long, winding hallway to the archives was lined with books, and as I walked, the books began to fly off the shelves, hurtling towards me with a malevolent force. They were not just books, they were weapons, filled with a dark, spiritual energy. I ducked and dodged, my head a blur of motion, as the paper projectiles whizzed past me. The whispers of the entity were a constant roar in my ears, promising a gruesome end. I could feel their presence all around me, a legion of tormented souls who were not trying to help me, but to hurt me. I was an intruder in their prison. Sex, an escape route that Arthur had used to get into the archives. I had found the way. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I knew that the entity was waiting for me on the other side, that the archives were a battlefield. But I was no longer afraid. I was a man on a mission, and I had the guidance of a tormented soul. The voices of the dead, once a chorus of torment, were now my allies, their cries a source of strength. I was a part of their story now, and I was going to write the final chapter. A chapter of freedom. The stone wall groaned, a low grinding sound of ancient machinery, as I pushed against the small crack Alara's spirit had shown me. With a final echoing shudder, a hidden passage slid open, revealing a stairwell of black stone descending into a darkness so complete it felt like a physical absence of light. The air that rushed out was cold and stagnant, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten sorrow. This was it, the belly of the beast. I had found the path to the archives, the heart of the curse, the place where souls went to die. I could feel the malevolent presence of the entity pulsing from the depths, a silent, predatory hum. It was waiting for me. I stepped into the darkness, and the stone wall slid shut behind me with a sickening thud, sealing me in. With each step down the cold, winding stairs, the silence was broken by new, horrifying sounds. Not whispers of anger, but cries of agony. The voices of the dead, the souls trapped by the curse, were now speaking to me. Their voices a symphony of endless pain. I heard the desperate sobs of a woman, a sorrow so profound it echoed through the very stone. I heard the pleading cries of a man, his voice a frantic prayer to a God who wouldn't answer. And I heard the terrified shriek of a child, a sound so pure and so heartbreaking that it cut through the darkness and shattered my resolve. My hands, once steady, began at meta, sex 0.05. Her ghostly hands reached out to me, her translucent fingers trying to grab my shirt to warn me. Her face, a mask of pure terror, was etched into my mind, a horrifying testament to the suffering that had occurred here. I felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of disorientation, and I had to stop for a moment, pressing my back against the cold stone wall, trying to regain my composure. The entity was not just a hunter. It was a torturer. It was making me walk through the living nightmares of its victims, reliving their final moments of terror. Tonight, fear will find you. A chorus of voices whispered from the darkness. Their words not a threat, but a mocking declaration. I knew now that I was not just walking into a trap. I was walking into a place where fear was a commodity, a currency that the entity used to sustain itself. It was feeding on the terror of its victims, and it wanted to feed on mine. My mind was no longer a safe place. It was a battlefield, and the enemy was using the ghosts of the past to wage a war against my sanity. I saw a fleeting vision of a man's face, his eyes hollowed out, his mouth a silent scream. I heard the crack of his neck as the entity had snapped it. I saw a vision of a young girl, her body bruised and broken, her spirit consumed by the darkness. I felt their pain, their terror, their final moments of despair. I was a vessel for their suffering. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push the horrifying visions out of my mind. I had to focus. I had a mission. I was here to save them, not to mourn them. I opened my eyes again, and the visions were gone. The ghostly footsteps were gone. The whispers were gone. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the low, ominous hum of the entity. It was toying with me, giving me a moment of respite before the next attack.
Stack at meta, pause, equals sex 0.05.
My hands trailing along the cold spines of the books, my eyes scanning the titles, searching for a clue, a sign, anything that would lead me to the hairpin. I was looking for a needle in a haystack, but I had to find it. I was in a ghost story now, and I had to think like one. I had to look for a clue that was not meant for the living, a secret that had been buried for a reason. I came to a small alcove in the wall, and my hand brushed against a book that was different from the others. It was small, a thin volume bound in a strange, dark material that felt like human skin. It had no title, no author. It was just a black, unmarked book. I pulled it from the shelf, and as I did, a gust of cold air rushed past me, a spectral breeze that smelled of fresh earth and grave dust. The whispers began again, not with rage, but with a new, frantic urgency. They were trying to tell me something, to warn me away. Tonight, fear will find you, they hissed, their words a plea, a warning to turn back. But I would not turn back. I opened the book,
and its pages were filled with a spidery, elegant handwriting. An old, forgotten script that I had only seen once before, in the diary of Alara Vance. It was her handwriting. The book was a journal, her second journal, a testament to her final moments. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the words. A story of her life, her love for Arthur, and the dark secret he had revealed to her. But this journal was different. It was not filled with despair and sorrow, but with a new, burning rage. She wrote about her betrayal, her imprisonment, and the cruel irony of her fate. She had been forced to be a beacon for the entity, a lure for its victims. But she had found a way to resist, a way to fight back. She wrote about a secret, a place that Arthur had told her about, a place of unspeakable horror that he had used for his dark rituals. It was a hidden room, a secret base.
Sex, 0.05 angry growl of the entity, its voice a low hum of pure, concentrated rage. It knew what I was doing. It knew I had the map. It was coming for me, but I was ready. I was not alone. The spirits of the dead, the ghosts of the victims, were with me, their silent presence a shield against the darkness. Tonight, fear will find you. The voice of the entity thundered in my head, but its words had lost their power. I was no longer afraid. I was ready. The stone wall gave way with a groan of protest, and I slipped through the narrow opening, the air on the other side thick and suffocating. It smelled of ancient dust, of mold, and of something else, something metallic and rotten, a scent I now recognized as spiritual decay. The light from my phone was a useless, feeble glow in the overwhelming darkness. I had entered a world of pure shadow, a place that had been sealed away for centuries. This was the secret basement, the place Arthur had used for his dark rituals, the heart of the curse. With each step deeper into the darkness, the air grew colder, and a new sound began to fill the silence. It was the faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps, a sound that was not in the present, but from a time long past. They were light and quick, a hurried patter of someone trying to run. I followed the sound, my body rigid with dread, my mind a storm of questions. I knew this was a trap. The entity was leading me, toying with me, savoring my terror. But I had to see it through. I had to know what had happened to Alara. I had to witness her final moments. The footsteps led me to a large circular chamber in the center of the basement. The walls were lined with strange occult symbols, their meaning lost to time, but their malevolence palpable. In the center of the room, a faint, ethereal glow began to appear, a soft light that pulsed with a rhythmic, haunting beat. The glow intensified, and a scene began to play out before me. A ghostly reenactment of the #meta, heights, pause, sex, 0.05. So vivid that I could feel the cold of the dagger, the pain of her final moments. The ghostly scene vanished, and the air grew colder, the silence so complete it was a scream in itself. I was alone now, but the horror of the scene I had just witnessed was a scar on my soul. I had seen her final moments, and I had seen his evil. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a burning, righteous anger. I had to find that hairpin. I had to find a way to sever the connection between the entity and the souls it had consumed. I had to make them pay. I walked to the center of the room, to the spot where the spectral reenactment had taken place.
The stone floor was etched with the same strange, occult symbols that were on the walls, and in the very center, there was a small, circular indentation. It was a place for something. A place for the hairpin. The entity was here. It was watching me. It was waiting for me to make a move, to show my hand. Tonight, fear will find you. The voice of the entity thundered in my head, its words a cruel mockery of my resolve. It was taunting me, daring me to continue, to show my courage. But I was not afraid. I was angry. I looked at the walls, at the terrifying symbols that had been etched into the stone. They were not just a part of the ritual. They were a part of the curse, a set of instructions, a roadmap to the entity's power. It was here, in this room, that the entity was most powerful. It was here that it was most vulnerable. I had come to the heart of the curse, and I was not going to leave without the key. I was going to find that hairpin, and I was going to set them all free. I was a man on a mission, a warrior against the darkness, and I was going to win. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against the cold stone floor, but my hands were steady. I had found the heart of the curse, the very spot.
Sex 0.05. A light that was so pure and so powerful that it drove the darkness back. The symbols on the walls glowed with a new burning intensity, and a wave of power, a wave of ancient magic, coursed through the very stone of the library. When the light faded, the circular indentation was gone, replaced by a small wooden box. It was old and worn, its surface carved with the same intricate symbols that were on the walls. It had no lock, no latch. It was sealed by magic, by the power of the curse. I knew I had to open it. I had to find the hairpin. I placed my hands on the box, and a jolt of pure, raw energy shot through me. A blast of power that made my teeth ache. The box was a living thing, a vessel for a cursed soul. I had to use my own will, my own resolve to open it. I focused all my energy on the box, my mind a blank slate, my will a laser beam of pure, unadulterated purpose. I was not afraid. I was a man on a mission. With a soft click, the box sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small silver hairpin. It was old and tarnished, its surface a dull gray, but as I touched it, it began to glow with a faint, ethereal light, a light that pulsed with a rhythmic, haunting beat. This was it, the hairpin, the last thing Arthur had given Alara, the anchor for her soul. I held it in my hand, its light a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. I had found it. I had won. But then, a new voice, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from the very ground, filled the silence. It was not a whisper, it was a roar. It was a voice filled with an ancient, malevolent rage. It was the voice of the entity, the voice of the one who had created this nightmare. It was #@meta. Sex 0.05, his eyes two pools of utter blackness, devoid of any humanity. He was not a man anymore. He was a vessel, a living testament to the evil he had embraced, and his body was a cage for the parasitic entity that now controlled him. He raised a hand, and his mouth, a cruel grimace, opened, but no words came out. Instead, a chorus of voices, 1,000 tormented souls, shrieked in unison, their words a physical force that hit me like a wave. "Tonight, fear will find you," they screamed, a final, horrifying promise. I clutched the hairpin in my hand, its faint, ethereal light a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness. I knew that this was it, the final confrontation. The entity wanted the hairpin. It was the anchor for Alara's soul, the key to her freedom, and it was the one thing that could sever the entity's connection to this library. Arthur Thorne, his face contorted in a mask of pure, malevolent rage, took a step towards me. His movements were slow and deliberate, a predator stalking its prey. I held the hairpin tighter, its faint warmth a shield against the cold that was now radiating from him. I could feel his hatred, his fury, a raw, unfiltered emotion that threatened to consume me. He raised a hand, not to strike me, but to torment me. The air around me began to twist and warp, and the ghostly figures of his past victims began to appear, swirling around me like a maelstrom of despair. I saw the face of the young woman I had seen earlier, her body broken and bruised, her silent scream of anguish a physical presence in the air. I saw the face of the man who had come before me, his eyes hollowed out, his mouth a silent scream. They were not trying to help me. They were trying to hurt me. They were trying to break my spirit, to make me give in to the fear, to make me give the hairpin back to their tormentor. Tonight, fear will find you. #meta, pause, sex, 0.05. And I knew that this was not a man anymore. It was a demon. It was a parasitic entity that had consumed a man and was now using him as a puppet, a tool for its own vile purpose. I was not afraid of it anymore. I was angry. I was filled with a burning, righteous fury that was a more powerful weapon than any fear. I raised the hairpin, its faint light a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. "I am not afraid of you," I whispered, my voice trembling, but my words were a steel-hard resolve. "You have no power over me." The entity's face, a mask of pure rage, contorted in a silent scream. It lunged at me, its movements a blur of pure, unadulterated hatred. But I was ready. I was a man on a mission, and I was going to win. I was going to set them all free, and I was going to make this monster pay. The clash was not a physical one. It was a battle of wills, a struggle between a man and a demon, between light and darkness. I held the hairpin tighter, its light growing brighter, and the entity's form began to flicker, its edges blurring, its substance turning into a cloud of black smoke. It was fighting back, but it was losing. I was winning. I had found the key to their freedom, and I was going to use it. The air around me crackled with malevolent energy, and the figure of Arthur Thorne, his eyes two pools of utter blackness, lunged at me. His movements were not physical, but spectral. He was a force of pure will, a shadow of the man he once was, and he was trying to break me. I stood my ground, clutching the hairpin in my hand, its faint ethereal light a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness. I knew that my only weapon was my mind, my resolve. I had to be stronger than his illusions, stronger than his hatred. The confrontation was not a battle of strength, but a battle for my sanity. He shrieked, a sound that was not a voice, but a tearing of fabric. #meta, pause, release 0.05. This was not real. This was an illusion, a trick of the light, a trap of the mind. I focused on the hairpin in my hand,
its faint, ethereal light an anchor in the stormy sea of my mind. It was my only weapon, my only hope. I opened my eyes, and the horrifying images were still there. But they were not as real. They were just shadows, just illusions. I was not afraid of them. He changed his tactics. The illusions of my fear vanished, replaced by a new, more insidious trap. He showed me what I wanted to see. I was no longer in the basement chamber, but back in my own bed, the morning sun streaming through my window. I heard the birds singing, the distant sound of cars on the street. I smelled the comforting scent of fresh coffee, the crisp air of a new day. A voice that sounded like my own, whispered in my ear. It was all a dream, Ethan. A terrible nightmare. You're safe now. Just give me the hairpin. Just let it go. He was trying to tempt me, to make me believe that my ordeal was over. He was offering me a way out, a way to escape this nightmare. But I knew it was a lie. The hairpin was still in my hand, its cold, metallic surface a chilling reminder of the truth. I held the hairpin tighter, my knuckles white, and I whispered, "It's a lie. You're a lie." The comforting scent of coffee vanished, replaced by the suffocating scent of dust and decay. The warm sunlight was gone, replaced by the dim, sickly light of the occult symbols. The figure of Arthur Thorne was still there, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He shrieked again, his voice a sound of pure rage and frustration, and he lunged at me again. He was losing. I was winning. I had learned to see through his illusions, to see his lies. To meta, pause, sex 0.05. A warrior against the darkness, and I was going to win. "Tonight, fear will find you," he shrieked, but his words were no longer a threat. They were a confession of his own defeat. I had overcome his illusions. I had found his weakness, and now I was going to make him pay. The final illusion shattered, and the figure of Arthur Thorne was gone, his form dissipating into a swirling vortex of black smoke and 1,000 echoing screams of frustration. I stood alone in the dark chamber, my heart pounding, but not with fear, with a fierce, defiant triumph. I had won the battle of wills. I had not given in to his illusions, his lies, his temptations. I had seen him for what he was, a puppet, a vessel for a malevolent entity. The hairpin in my hand was a beacon of hope, its faint light a small sun in the darkness, a promise of freedom for the souls trapped in this place. But the silence that followed my victory was short-lived. A new sound filled the chamber, a low, guttural growl that came from the very walls. The entity was not defeated, it was enraged. It had lost its puppet, but it was still here, its presence a suffocating weight that pressed down on me from all sides. I clutched the hairpin tighter, its faint warmth a shield against the bone-chilling cold that now radiated from the walls. I had to get out. I had to get the hairpin to its proper place. The diary had not said where that was, only that it was a place of sanctuary, a place of peace. But I knew what it meant. The hairpin was the anchor for Alara's soul, and it needed to be returned to the place where it was taken from her, the place where she felt safe. The librarian's office. I turned and ran, not back the way I had come, but towards a new, narrower passage that the entity had created in its rage. The walls of the passage were made of the same black, cold stone, and they seemed to writhe and twist in the darkness, a living thing. I could hear the footsteps of the entity behind me, not a physical sound, but a low, rhythmic thud that vibrated through the very stone beneath my
Sex 0.05, hanging from the wall, its light a flickering, ghostly glow. I ran towards it, my body screaming in protest, and as I reached it, I saw that it was not a lantern at all. It was a vision, a horrifying illusion, a brief glimpse of the past. I saw Arthur Thorne, his face a mask of malevolent triumph, his eyes two pools of utter blackness, as he placed the hairpin on a small wooden altar. He was performing the ritual, his movements slow and deliberate, and he was laughing, a low, guttural laugh that echoed in the darkness. The vision faded, but the sound of his laughter lingered in my mind, a cruel taunt. I was not in the maze anymore. I was in a ghost story. The entity was not just a hunter. It was a storyteller, a malevolent puppeteer, and it was making me watch the final moments of its victims, reliving their terror, their despair, their final moments of agony. It was trying to break me, to make me give in to the fear, to make me give the hairpin back to it. But I would not break. I was a man on a mission, a warrior against the darkness, and I was going to win. I was going to get the hairpin to the office, and I was going to set them all free. I ran faster, the passage now filled with the ghostly figures of the dead, their faces masks of agony, their hands reaching out to me, their silent screams a physical force that tore at my very soul. They were not trying to help me. They were trying to stop me. They were afraid of what would happen if I succeeded. They were afraid of freedom. "Tonight, fear will find you," they shrieked, their words a warning, a desperate plea to turn back. But I would not turn back. I had come this far. I was not going to give up now. I was going to save them. I ran. The staircase I had so cautiously descended, the sound of my own frantic breathing. It was all a chaotic symphony of terror. I could feel the cold breath of the entity on my neck, its ghostly hands reaching for me, trying to drag me back. "Tonight, fear will find you." 1,000 voices shrieked, their words a physical force that tore at my clothes and my skin. But I was not afraid. I had the hairpin. I had the key to their freedom. I had the power to end this nightmare. With a final, desperate burst of energy, I threw myself against the office door, the old wood groaning in protest. I stumbled inside, my body a lead weight, my mind a storm of adrenaline and purpose. I was here. I had made it. The entity, its roar a furious scream of rage, slammed against the door from the outside. But the door, once locked by a malevolent force, was now a sanctuary. It was a barrier that the entity could not cross. I was safe. For now. I stood in the center of the room, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I looked at the desk where I had first found the photograph of Alara Vance. Her face, a mask of sorrow, was now etched with a faint, hopeful smile. I had come full circle. I was back where it all began, and I was going to finish what she had started. I clutched the hairpin in my hand, its light a beacon of hope, its warmth a shield against the cold. The whispers of the dead, once a chorus of rage, were now a gentle murmur,
a sound of peaceful anticipation. They were waiting. They were waiting for me to set them free. I placed the hairpin on the desk, right next to the photograph of Alara. The air around it began to shimmer, to twist and warp, and the faint light from the hairpin grew brighter, a white-hot beacon in the darkness. The light intensified, a blinding, ethereal flash that filled the entire room. A light so pure and so powerful that it made the very stones of the library tremble. The screams of the entity, the voices of the dead, the chaos of the library, it all ceased. There was only the sound. The light faded, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical absence of sound. The chaos of the library, the frantic whispering of the dead, the furious roar of the entity, it had all ceased. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the soft, almost imperceptible hum of a deep, abiding peace. I was alone now, but I wasn't. The room was filled with a new presence, a feeling of gratitude and relief so strong it brought tears to my eyes. I looked at the figure before me, her form luminous and clear, her face no longer a mask of sorrow, but a portrait of pure, unadulterated peace. She was a beacon of light in the darkness, a testament to the power of a single soul to defy the darkness. Her eyes, once so haunting in the photograph, were now filled with a profound gratitude, a silent thank you that spoke volumes. She smiled, a soft, gentle smile that lit up the room, and she looked at me, her eyes filled with a new, beautiful light. She was free. She was no longer a prisoner, no longer a beacon for a malevolent entity. She was at peace. She raised a hand, not to warn me, but to say goodbye. Her lips moved, and her voice, a soft, loving whisper, echoed in my mind. Thank you, Ethan. You have set us free. Now, it is time for you to go home. She was telling me that my work was done, that my ordeal was over. She was giving me my freedom. Her luminous form began to flicker, to fade, and she was gone. A silent, beautiful goodbye. The hairpin on the desk was now just a piece of old, tarnished metal, its light gone, its purpose fulfilled. The room was no longer filled with the hum of peace, but with a new, quiet silence. A silence that was filled with the sense of finality. The curse was broken. The entity was gone. The souls of the dead were free. #meta. Pause. Bot 0.05. I had lost a part of myself. I was not the same man who had walked into this library. I was a different person. A person who had seen the darkness and had survived. I walked out of the office into the main hall, and the old library was silent. The books were back on their shelves, the chairs were back in their places, and the grand staircase was now just a normal staircase, its steps solid and unyielding. The whispers of the dead, the screams of the entity, the chaos, it was all gone. There was only the sound of my own footsteps, a lonely, solitary sound in the silent library. I walked to the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, and I knew that I was finally going home. The final, distant whisper of the entity, a low, defeated growl, echoed in the darkness. Tonight, fear will find you. But the words had lost their power. I was not afraid. I was free. I had survived the nightmare. I had won. A profound, heavy silence settled over the library. A silence that was more terrifying than any scream. The chaos of the night was gone, replaced by a still, cold quiet that felt final. I stood in the middle of the main hall, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I had done it. I had saved them. I had defied a demon and survived. The books were back on their shelves. The chairs were back in their places. And the grand staircase was now just a staircase. It was over. I had won. But as I took a single, exhausted step towards the front door, a sound, a new sound, broke the silence. It was not a roar, not a scream, not a whisper of 1,000 voices. It was a single, soft, familiar whisper. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A sound that was not in the present but from a time long past. They were a warning. A desperate, final warning to a fool who had thought he was a hero. The air grew so cold it burned my lungs, and from the darkest corner of the library, a new presence began to materialize. It was not a shadow, it was a person, a woman with a face so pale it was almost transparent, her eyes two pools of utter blackness. She was wearing the clothes of a bygone era, her dress old and worn. She was not a ghost. She was a living testament to the evil that had been set loose. She was the cursed one, the one who had been bound to the library for all eternity. She was a new puppet for the demon. The figure of the woman began to move, her footsteps a soft, silent whisper on the cold marble floor. She was not a part of the entity. She was its new host, its new vessel, its new prison. The extent hadn't been defeated. It had found a new, more powerful way to exist. It was no longer bound to the library. It was free, and it was going to make me its next victim. The voice in my head was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. It was the sound of 1,000 souls screaming in unison, a chorus of despair and hatred. They were trapped inside of me now, a part of my body, a part of my soul. I was their new prison, their new grave. I dropped the key, my hands trembling with a fear that was now so profound it was a physical weight. I had been a fool. I had thought I was the hero, the one who would save them. But I had been the one who had condemned them. I had set them free from the library, but I had trapped them in myself. The figure of the woman smiled, a slow, malevolent smile that was not her own. And she raised a hand, her fingers beckoning me to come closer. I was in a ghost story now, and I was not the hero. I was the final victim. My heart, once filled with a triumphant beat, was now a hollow meta, and I had put it in its place. I had set them free, but I hadn't. I had just transferred them from the library to me. A voice, a soft, familiar voice, echoed in my mind. It was Alara's voice, but it was not filled with gratitude. It was filled with a chilling, malevolent glee. You were so easy, Ethan, so predictable. All I had to do was show you what you wanted to see. A hero, a savior, and you came running. I fell to my knees, my body a lead weight, my mind a storm of pure pure, unadulterated despair. The image of her beautiful, peaceful smile, her eyes filled with gratitude, was all a lie. A cruel, calculated illusion meant to make me believe that I was doing the right thing. She had not been a victim. She had been a betrayer, a deceiver. She had wanted me to find the hairpin. She had wanted me to set her free, but not from the curse, from the library, from the place that had been her prison for a century. She had wanted a new one, me. The cursed souls, once a chorus of despair, were now a chorus of pure, malevolent rage. They were not screaming because they were in agony. They were screaming because they were free. Free to terrorize, free to hunt, free to live inside of me. I could feel them now, 1,000 souls, a legion of the dead, living inside my body, a part of my soul. I was their new prison. I was their new grave. The figure of the pale woman smiled, her lips a silent, cruel grimace, and she raised a hand, her fingers beckoning me to come closer. She was not a ghost. She was a living testament to the evil that had been set loose. She was a new puppet for the demon. The air grew so cold it burned my lungs, and from the darkest corner of the library, a new presence began to materialize. It was not a shadow. It was a person. A man. A man with a face so pale it was almost transparent. His eyes two pools of utter blackness. He
Shat meta. Sex 0.05.
I was in a ghost story now, and I was not the hero. I was the final victim.
My heart, once filled with a triumphant beat, was now a hollow, empty space, a place where 1,000 souls were screaming in unison. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. The whispers in my head, 1,000 frantic, terrified souls screaming in unison, were now a physical weight, a suffocating pressure that made my teeth ache. The cold that had permeated the air was gone, replaced by a burning, malevolent heat that smelled of ozone and scorched earth. The figure of the pale woman, a new puppet for the demon, stood before me, her face a mask of malevolent triumph. I had been a fool. I had been so filled with the delusion of being a hero that I had walked right into a trap that had been set for centuries. I had not saved the souls. I had merely transferred them. But then, a new voice, a voice so old and so powerful that it made the very stones of the library tremble, filled the silence. It was not a whisper. It was a roar. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a sound that was not a voice, but a tearing of the very fabric of reality. The figure of the pale woman stumbled, her face a mask of fear, and she fell to her knees, her body a puppet whose strings had just been cut. The entity that had possessed her was gone, a wisp of smoke, a distant echo of a defeated scream. Something new, something ancient, something infinitely more powerful had just entered the room. From the darkest corner of the library, the very heart of the occult symbols on the walls, a new presence began to materialize. It was not a ghost. It was not a demon. It was a being of pure malevolence, a creature of shadow and will. Its form was not solid, but it was not a shadow either. It was a shifting, writhing mass of darkness, its edges blurred, its substance a chaotic maelstrom of raw, destructive power. It had no eyes, no mouth, no face. Hashtag at meta. Pause. Sex 0.05.
It was not here to haunt. It was here to consume. It had used the curse as a tool, a way to lure in new victims, new vessels. It had used Arthur Thorne's ambition, his greed, to create a ritual that would bind souls to this place. It had used Alara Vance's despair, her sorrow,
to create a beacon for its new prey. And it had used my own hubris, my own delusion of being a hero, to make me its new vessel. I was a man on a mission, and I had been a fool. I had thought I was the one pulling the strings, but I had been a puppet all along. I had played its game. I had followed its rules. I had done everything it had wanted me to do. And now, I was going to pay the price. The creature of pure darkness began to move, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke, and it moved towards me, its movements a slow, deliberate dance of death. It was not in a hurry. It had all the time in the world. It was an ancient, timeless being, and I was just a fleeting moment in its eternity. My heart, once filled with a triumphant beat, was now a hollow, empty space. A place where 1,000 souls were screaming in unison. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. The final confrontation was not with a ghost, not with a demon, but with a cosmic entity, a being of pure, unadulterated evil. I was a rat in a cage, and the cage was my own mind. I had nowhere to run. I had nowhere to hide. I was alone, and I was going to die. My final moments would be filled with a terror so profound that it would echo for all eternity. The curse was not broken. It had just begun. The overwhelming presence of the ancient, malevolent entity was a physical weight, a suffocating force that pressed down on me from all sides. The screams of 1,000 souls were now a chaotic symphony in my head, a sound that was driving me insane. I was a man of logic, a man of reason, but here, in this room, logic was dead. The creature of pure dark
Hashtag meta heights pause _ renovated 0.05. My trembling fingers clutching the old tarnished key I had found in the basement. It had not been a key to a box. It had been a key to a curse. A key to my own grave. The hairpin had not been a key to their freedom. It had been a key to my own doom. I had set them free, but I hadn't. I had just transferred them. From the library to me. The whispers of the dead, the screams of the victims, they weren't a plea for help. They were a warning. A desperate, final warning to a fool who had thought he was a hero. I could feel their presence now. 1,000 souls, a legion of the dead living inside my body, a part of my soul. I was their new prison. I was their new grave. The creature of pure darkness began to move, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke, and it moved towards me. Its movements a slow, deliberate dance of death. It was not in a hurry. It had all the time in the world. It was an ancient, timeless being, and I was just a fleeting moment in its eternity. A single, telepathic thought, a cold, sharp blade of pure malevolence pierced my mind. Tonight, fear will find you. The words were no longer a threat. They were a confession of my own existence, my own purpose. I was not a person to it. I was a vessel, a tool, a new home for the souls it had consumed. It had used me. It had played me. It had won. I fell to my knees, my body a lead weight, my mind a storm of pure, unadulterated despair. I had been a hero, a savior,
a warrior against the darkness, but I had been a lie. I had been a fool. My entire life had been a joke, a cruel, cosmic joke played by a being of pure, unadulterated evil. I had thought I was a man of logic, a man of reason. Shit. Meta. No mouth, no face. But I could feel its gaze. A gaze of pure, cosmic indifference. A gaze that saw me not as a person, but as a tool. I was not a person to it. I was just a vessel, a vehicle, a new home for the souls it had consumed. I had been a fool. I had been so filled with the delusion of being a hero, a savior, a warrior against the darkness, that I had walked right into a trap that had been set for centuries. I had thought I was the one pulling the strings, the one in control, but I had been a puppet all along. My entire journey, from the moment I had found the photograph to the moment I had placed the hairpin on the desk, had been a lie. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't understand. A game played by a being that was older than time itself. I had followed its rules. I had done everything it had wanted me to do. And now, I was going to pay the price. I looked at my hands, my trembling fingers clutching the old, tarnished key I had found in the basement. It had not been a key to a box. It had been a key to a curse. A key to my own grave. The hairpin had not been a key to their freedom. It had been a key to my own doom. I had set them free. But I hadn't. I had just transferred them. From the library to me. The whispers of the dead, the screams of the victims. They weren't a plea for help. They were a warning. A desperate, final warning to a fool who had thought he was a hero. I could feel their presence now. 1,000 souls, a legion of the dead, living inside my body, a part of my soul. I was their new prison. I was their new grave. The creature of pure darkness began to move, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke, and it moved towards me, its movements a slow, deliberate dance of death. Sex 0.05. Oppressive weight that was slowly suffocating me. It was a silent, patient hunter, and I was its prey. I had nowhere to run. I had nowhere to hide. I was alone, and I was going to die. My final moments would be filled with a terror so profound that it would echo for all eternity. The curse was not broken. It had just begun. I was a prisoner, a ghost, a part of a story that would never end. I had thought I was the hero, but I was just a pawn. The crushing weight of the entity's presence was a physical force, a suffocating pressure that made my lungs ache and my teeth ache. The screams of 1,000 souls were a chaotic symphony in my head, a sound that was tearing at the very fabric of my being. I was a man of logic, a man of reason, but here, in this room, logic was dead. The creature of pure darkness, the puppet master, loomed over me, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke and 1,000 tormented faces. It had no eyes, no mouth, no face, but I could feel its gaze, a gaze of pure, cosmic indifference.
A gaze that saw me not as a person, but as a tool. I was not a person to it. I was just a vessel, a vehicle, a new home for the souls it had consumed. I had been a fool. I had been so filled with the delusion of being a hero, a savior, a warrior against the darkness that I had walked right into a trap that had been set for centuries. I had thought I was the one pulling the strings, the one in control, but I had been a puppet all along. My entire journey, from the moment I had found the photograph to the moment I had placed the hairpin on the desk, had been a lie. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game played by a being that was older than time itself. I had followed its rules. I had done everything it had wanted me to do. And now, I was going to pay the price. I looked at my hands. My
Hashtag @meta. They were a confession of my own existence, my own purpose. I was not a person to it. I was a vessel, a tool, a new home for the souls it had consumed. It had used me. It had played me. It had won. I fell to my knees, my body a lead weight, my mind a storm of pure, unadulterated despair. I had been a hero, a savior, a warrior against the darkness. But I had been a lie. I had been a fool. My entire life had been a joke. A cruel, cosmic joke, played by a being of pure, unadulterated evil. I had thought I was a man of logic, a man of reason, but I had been nothing but a pawn, a puppet, a part of a story I didn't understand. I had fought a ghost. I had defied a demon. I had survived a nightmare. But I had lost. I had lost the war. And I was going to pay the price. The creature of pure darkness loomed over me, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke, and I could feel its presence. A cold, oppressive weight that was slowly suffocating me. It was a silent, patient hunter, and I was its prey. I had nowhere to run. I had nowhere to hide. I was alone, and I was going to die. My final moments would be filled with a terror so profound that it would echo for all eternity. The curse was not broken. It had just begun. I was a prisoner, a ghost, a part of a story that would never end. I had thought I was the hero, but I was just a pawn. A profound, heavy silence settled over the library, a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. The chaos of the night was gone, replaced by a still, cold quiet that felt final. I stood in the middle of the main hall, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I had done it. I had saved them. I had defied a demon and survived. #meta, pause, sex 0.05. My trembling fingers clutching the old tarnished key I had found in the basement. It had not been a key to a box. It had been a key to a curse, a key to my own grave. The hairpin had not been a key to their freedom. It had been a key to my own doom. I had set them free, but I hadn't. I had just transferred them from the library to me. The whispers of the dead, the The screams of the victims, they weren't a plea for help. They were a warning, a desperate, final warning to a fool who had thought he was a hero. I could feel their presence now. 1,000 souls, a legion of the dead, living inside my body, a part of my soul. I was their new prison. I was their new grave. The figure of the pale woman stood before me, her face a mask of malevolent triumph, her eyes 2 pools of utter blackness. She was not the cursed one. I was. I had been a fool. I had been so filled with the delusion of being a hero that I had walked right into a trap that had been set for centuries. The creature of pure darkness, the puppet master, loomed over me, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke and 1,000 tormented faces. It had no eyes, no mouth, no face. But I could feel its gaze, a gaze of pure, cosmic indifference, a gaze that saw me not as a person, but as a tool. I fell to my knees, my body a lead weight, my mind a storm of pure, unadulterated despair. I had been a hero, a savior, a warrior against the darkness, but I had been a lie. I had been a fool. My entire life had been a joke, a cruel, cosmic joke played by a being of pure, unadulterated evil. I had thought I was a man of logic, a man of reason, but I had been nothing but a pawn, a puppet, a part of a story I didn't understand. I had fought a ghost. I had defied a demon. I had survived a night.
#meta sex 0.05. A sound that was tearing at the very fabric of my being.
I was a man of logic, a man of reason. But here, in this room, logic was dead. The creature of pure darkness, the puppet master, loomed over me, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke and 1,000 tormented faces. It had no eyes, no mouth, no face, but I could feel its gaze, a gaze of pure, cosmic indifference, a gaze that saw me not as a person, but as a tool. I was not a person to it. I was just a vessel, a vehicle, a new home for the souls it had consumed. I had been a fool. I had been so filled with the delusion of being a hero, a savior, a warrior against the darkness, that I had walked right into a trap that had been set for centuries. I had thought I was the one pulling the strings, the one in control. But I had been a puppet all along. My entire journey, from the moment I had found the photograph to the moment I had placed the hairpin on the desk, had been a lie. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game played by a being that was older than time itself. I had followed its rules. I had done everything it had wanted me to do. And now, I was going to pay the price. I looked at my hands, my trembling fingers clutching the old, tarnished key I had found in the basement. It had not been a key to a box. It had been a key to a curse. A key to my own grave. The hairpin had not been a key to their freedom. It had been a key to my own doom. I had set them free, but I hadn't. I had just transferred them from the library to me. The whispers of the dead, the screams of the victims, they weren't a plea for help. They were a warning. A desperate, final warning to a fool who had thought. Sex 0.05. I had fought a ghost. I had defied a demon. I had survived a nightmare. But I had lost. I had lost the war. And I was going to pay the price. The creature of pure darkness loomed over me, its form a shifting, writhing mass of black smoke. And I could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive weight that was slowly suffocating me. It was a silent, patient hunter, and I was its prey. I had nowhere to run. I had nowhere to hide. I was alone, and I was going to die. My final moments would be filled with a terror so profound that it would echo for all eternity. The curse was not broken. It had just begun. I was a prisoner, a ghost, a part of a story that would never end. I had thought I was the hero, but I was just a pawn. I was a fool, a lie, a joke. My heart, once filled with a triumphant beat, was now a hollow, empty space, a place where 1,000 souls were screaming in unison. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. My final moments would be filled with a terror so profound that it would echo for all eternity. The overwhelming, suffocating presence of the entity was gone. A final, despairing shriek echoing in the silence. The screams of 1,000 souls were no longer in my head. They were a distant, mournful echo. A final, sad farewell. I stood in the middle of the deepest, most hidden part of the library, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I had done it. I had saved them. I had defied a demon and survived. The books were back on their shelves. The chairs were back in their places. And the grand staircase was now just a staircase. It was over. I had won. But the victory felt bittersweet. The silence. #meta. Pause. Sex 0.05. I walked out of the deepest part of the library back into the main hall, and the old library was silent. The books were back on their shelves, the chairs were back in their places, and the grand staircase was now just a normal staircase, its steps solid and unyielding. The whispers of the dead, the screams of the entity, the chaos, it was all gone. There was only the sound of my own footsteps, a lonely, solitary sound in the silent library. I walked to the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, and I knew that I was finally going home. The final distant whisper of the entity, a low, defeated growl, echoed in the darkness. Tonight, fear will find you. But the words had lost their power. I was not afraid. I was free. I had survived the nightmare. I had won. But I was not free. I was a man who had seen a ghost, who had defied a demon,
who had survived a nightmare. I was a man who had a story to tell. A story that no one would ever believe. I was a man who had seen the darkness, and the darkness had seen me. I was a survivor, but the haunting was not over. It was a part of me now. It was a part of my soul. I was a man who had a secret that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I was the only one who knew the truth. I was the only one who knew what had happened in this library. I was the only one who knew about Alara Vance, about Arthur Thorne, about the hairpin, about the curse. I was the only one who knew about the true, malevolent entity that had orchestrated the whole thing. I was a man who had a secret that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I was a man who had a story to tell, a story that no one would ever believe. I was a man who had seen the darkness, but one of profound absence. The silence was so complete, so absolute, that it was a scream in itself. The library was no longer a place of horror, but it was not a place of peace either. It was a place of ghosts, a place where a terrible tragedy had occurred, and the echoes of that tragedy would forever linger in its cold stone halls. I was alone now, but I wasn't. The room was filled with a new presence, a feeling of gratitude and relief so strong it brought tears to my eyes. I had come to the library looking for a story, and I had found one. But I had lost a friend. I had lost a part of myself. I was not the same man who had walked into this library. I was a different person. A person who had seen the darkness and had survived. The library was silent, but it was not empty. The ghosts were still here. They were not trapped anymore, but they were not gone either. They were a part of this place, a part of its history, a part of its soul. I could feel their presence, a silent, watchful presence. A gentle hum of peace that was a testament to their freedom. They were no longer a curse. They were a part of the library's history. A tragic, painful history that I was now a part of. I was a part of their story, and they were a part of mine. I walked out of the deepest part of the library, back into the main hall. And the old library was silent. The books were back on their shelves. The chairs were back in their places. And the grand staircase was now just a normal staircase, its steps solid and unyielding. The whispers of the dead, the screams of the entity, the chaos, it was all gone. There was only the sound of my own footsteps, a lonely, solitary sound in the silent library. I walked to the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, and I knew that I was finally going home.
A book that was a testament to the fact that ghosts were real.
The book was a failure. It was dismissed as a work of fiction, a product of a wild imagination. But I didn't care. I had to tell the story. I had to tell the truth. My story, a tale of a library, a janitor, a ghost, and a curse, became a local legend. It was passed down from generation to generation, a grim fairy tale to be told in hushed tones, a warning to those who dared to enter the Westwick Public Library after dark.
The library was now a place of peace, a place of quiet study, a place where people came to read, to learn, to grow. But it was not a place of peace for me. It was a place of ghosts, a place where a terrible tragedy had occurred, and the echoes of that tragedy would forever linger in my mind, in my soul. I was a survivor, but the haunting was not over. It was a part of me now. It was a part of my soul. I was a man who had a secret that would haunt me for the rest of my life. And so, my story ends not with a victory, but with a lingering sense of dread, a chilling reminder that some nightmares never end. The library may be quiet now, but the whispers of the past, the screams of the dead, the roar of the entity, it all lives on. It lives on in me. It lives on in my story. It lives on in the legend that now haunts the Westwick Public Library. A legend that serves as a final, chilling warning to all those who dare to venture into the darkness. A legend that whispers to all those who dare to listen. Tonight, fear will find you.